The glass was too clean. Emma Whitaker noticed it before she noticed the roses. Before the black candles were lit along the high table. Before the musicians tuned their strings beneath the carved balcony. Before the first noblewoman swept into Ravenhall Keep with diamonds at her throat and hunger hidden behind her smile. Before the servants began carrying trays of roasted pheasant, sugared figs, dark bread, and wine so old that one bottle cost more than Emma had earned in 3 winters. She noticed the glass because glass told the truth when people did not. Most crystal held some trace of handling. A faint fog from warm breath. A soft line where linen had wiped too quickly. A thumb mark near the stem. A crescent of dust caught under the base if the servant polishing it had been tired, careless, or frightened by the steward shouting over his shoulder. But this glass had nothing. No haze. No streak. No warmth. It stood at the center of the silver tray like a piece of frozen water, clear enough to make the candlelight around it seem nervous. Even the rim looked wrong, too sharp in the way clean things became sharp when they had been stripped instead of washed. Emma's hand stopped above it. Only for a second. That was almost too long. Do not stare at the king's glass. Mrs. Vale snapped from the end of the preparation table. Emma lowered her eyes at once. Yes, ma'am. The answer came easily because obedience had lived in her mouth longer than courage had. She was 23 years old, a maid in Ravenhall Keep, and she had learned the geography of survival in stone corridors. Walk close to the wall. Keep your voice low. Never let your face show what your mind has seen. A maid could carry wine to a king and still be less important than the tray beneath it. That was the rule. That was the safety. That was the shape her life had taken since her mother's apothecary shop closed and debts turned knowledge into something too poor to matter. Emma picked up the crystal glass by the stem and held it toward the candle. Nothing clung to it. That was the problem. Crystal did not become that clean from soap and water. Not in a busy kitchen before an alliance feast. Not when 50 glasses had been polished in a room full of steam, smoke, and anxious hands. Something had bitten it clean. A memory rose before she could stop it. Her mother at the old wooden counter, sleeves rolled to the elbow, holding a vial over blue flame while rain struck the shop window. Some poisons leave stains, Em. The dangerous ones leave absence. They take the smell, the color, the trace of themselves, and make people trust the empty place. Emma's fingers tightened around the stem. The glass remained cold. Too cold. She set it back on the tray and reached for the linen cloth, pretending to polish what needed no polishing. Around her, the preparation room moved in quick, nervous pieces. Servants whispered. Footmen arranged wine bottles in ranked order. The steward checked the seating chart for the 3rd time. Mrs. Vale inspected every maid as if a wrinkled apron might collapse the kingdom. Tonight was not only a feast. Tonight was the alliance vow. Alpha King Julian Wolfe would raise his ceremonial glass before the entire court of Ravenhall and seal his political union with Lady Celeste Morgan, the woman chosen to bind 3 border packs beneath one crown. The nobles called it peace. The council called it necessary. The servants called it dangerous only when no one important was close enough to hear. Emma looked toward the high table through the open archway. The king's chair waited at the center, black oak beneath the Ravenhall banner, its carved wolf heads watching the room with open mouths. Beside it, a smaller chair had been placed for Lady Celeste. Behind both, a position had been marked for Beta Marcus Reed, the man trusted to inspect every entrance, every guard, every blade, every cup. Every cup. Emma looked down again. The glass gave back her reflection in broken pieces. Pale skin, light brown hair pinned too tightly, gray dress, white apron, eyes that had learned to look away and failed tonight. Whitaker, Mrs. Vale said. Take the tray to the high table. Emma lifted it carefully. The crystal glass stood in the center. Too clear. Too cold. Too perfect. A maid was not allowed to suspect royal wine. A maid was not allowed to remember lessons from an unlicensed apothecary mother in a room full of silver and rank. A maid was not allowed to think that the most powerful wolf in the kingdom might be safer if she dropped the glass and accepted punishment. So Emma walked into Ravenhall's great hall with the tray balanced between both hands. The nobles laughed. The candles burned blue. And at the center of the tray, the Alpha King's glass waited like a beautiful lie. The hall changed before Alpha King Julian Wolfe entered it. Emma felt it through the tray. A stillness moved across Ravenhall Keep from the far doors to the high table, passing over nobles, guards, servants, candles, and music like a hand lowering over a flame. The musicians stopped tuning. Conversations folded shut. A man near the western pillar set down his wine without drinking. Even the servants along the wall straightened as if their spines had been pulled by invisible thread. Then the doors opened. Julian Wolfe stepped into the great hall. He did not hurry. Men who needed to prove power made noise when they entered rooms. They let guards shout their names. They wore gold bright enough to blind, laughed too loudly, touched shoulders that did not want touching, and waited for the world to notice them. Julian did none of that. The world noticed anyway. He wore black formal wool fitted across broad shoulders, the collar fastened with a dark silver clasp shaped like a wolf's head. His hair was dark, swept back from a face cut in hard lines and colder patience. His eyes moved once across the hall, gray and sharp, not admiring the feast, not greeting the nobles, but measuring exits, hands, distances, threats. Emma lowered her eyes before those eyes reached her. That was what maids did. But the tray remained in her hands, and at the center of it, the glass stayed too clean. Behind Julian walked Beta Marcus Reed. He looked exactly the way trusted men were supposed to look. Calm, controlled, useful. His charcoal coat bore the Ravenhall crest at the shoulder, and his gloved hands rested loosely at his sides, as if he had already checked every danger and found the room obedient. Nobles nodded to him with the ease of people who believed safety had a face. Servants moved aside before he came near. Guards took his smallest glance as instruction. Beside him came Lady Celeste Morgan. Beautiful in the way dangerous things often were beautiful. Her gown was pale silver, soft enough to look innocent beneath the blue candlelight, but the black rose ring on her right hand caught Emma's eye before the diamonds at her throat did. The ring was too dark for a wedding promise. Its petals were carved from polished onyx, each one sharp-edged, closed around a center that did not reflect the light. Celeste smiled when the hall bowed. Julian did not. Emma stepped closer to the high table because Mrs. Vale had trained fear into her feet. Tray balanced, eyes lowered, shoulders small, invisible until service required her, gone before attention became danger. The ceremonial glass waited. Julian approached his chair. Marcus moved behind him. Celeste took her place at his right. And then Emma saw it. Not a touch. Not a whisper. A glance. Marcus looked at the glass first. Only half a second, but too directly for a man who had inspected every cup already. His eyes did not pass over the tray. They found the center, measured it, then moved away. Celeste looked next. Her smile did not change. That was what made Emma cold. The lady's eyes slid to the crystal rim, then to Julian's mouth, then away before anyone important could call it attention. Emma's fingers tightened beneath the tray. Her mother's voice returned, soft and terrible. Poisoners watch the cup. Cowards watch the victim. Julian reached the chair, but did not sit. He turned toward the hall, and every noble lowered their head in practiced respect. The alliance feast glittered around him. Silver plates, blue flames, black roses, old wine, expensive lies. Peace had been dressed beautifully tonight. Emma stood 2 steps from the Alpha King with the tray held steady and a truth she could not yet prove. The glass was too clean. The Beta had looked at it. The fiancé had smiled. And Julian Wolfe, the most powerful wolf in Ravenhall, was about to raise death to his lips. The wine smelled wrong. Emma knew it before the first drop touched the glass. Ravenhall's ceremonial wine was supposed to smell of dark fruit, smoke, old oak, and the faint mineral sharpness that came from being stored in the northern cellars beneath stone cold enough to remember winter all year. She had carried enough bottles to know that scent. She had cleaned enough spilled wine from tablecloths, cuffs, floors, and noble tempers to know the difference between expensive bitterness and something hiding under sweetness. This was not wine alone. Emma stood at the high table with the silver tray balanced in her left hand and the crystal bottle in her right. Around her, the hall watched Julian Wolfe prepare to begin the alliance vow. No one watched the maid pouring the king's glass because a maid's hands were meant to move without becoming part of the ceremony. That was how she saw it. The first stream of wine slipped into the glass, deep red beneath the blue candlelight. It should have bloomed against the crystal, catching color, warmth, reflection. Instead, it hesitated, only for half a breath. The liquid touched the bottom of the glass and formed a thin circle before spreading outward, as if it had met something already waiting there. Emma's heart stopped. A faint silver ring appeared beneath the wine. Not bright, not obvious. A delicate dusting around the base, so fine that anyone standing farther away would mistake it for candle glare. But Emma had grown up behind her mother's apothecary counter, where powders meant life or death depending on whose hands measured them. She knew the way crushed silver clung to glass. She knew the way it refused to dissolve quickly, choosing instead to shimmer at the edge of liquid like frost-refusing spring. Silver dust. Her grip tightened on the bottle. The smell rose next. Sweet at first. Too sweet. Like black cherries left too long in heat. Like flowers cut and forgotten in a closed room. Then beneath it came the second note. Bitter and dry. Almost almond. Almost earth. Sharp enough to make the back of her throat close. Nightroot. Emma's mouth went cold. Her mother's voice returned so clearly that for one painful second the great hall vanished, and Emma was 10 years old again, standing in the narrow shop while rain struck the windows and blue flame flickered beneath a copper spoon. Nightroot hides under sweetness, Em. Silver makes it bite wolf blood faster. Emma nearly spilled the wine. Nearly. But maids who spilled near kings did not get asked why. They got removed. She finished the pour with hands that looked steadier than they felt and lowered the bottle back to the tray. The silver dust swirled once at the bottom of Julian's glass, then disappeared beneath the red. No proof. Not anymore. Only smell. Only memory. Only a maid's impossible certainty standing between the Alpha King and a poison designed for his blood. Across the table, Lady Celeste Morgan lifted her own glass with graceful fingers. The black rose ring on her hand faced inward, toward her palm, as if even the jewel knew to hide its face. Behind Julian, Beta Marcus Reed watched the room. Not the exits now. The glass. Emma saw his gaze flick once to the blue flame candle near the king's plate. The candle burned steady, ceremonial, harmless. But her mother had kept a blue flame in the apothecary for testing tinctures. Certain poisons turned the flame black when warmed near them. Why was the candle still blue? Unless the poison was not in the wine. Emma looked at the rim. The answer was there. A faint clear sheen along the crystal's edge, invisible until the candlelight caught it at the exact wrong angle. Not a stain. A coating. The nightroot was on the rim. The silver was in the base. The wine only carried the lie. Julian reached for the glass. Emma's body moved before permission could stop it. She set one hand lightly against the stem. A tiny gesture. Nothing more. But Marcus saw. His gloved fingers closed around her wrist, so quickly the bottle trembled on the tray. Careful, he said, smiling for the hall. Maid should not touch what the king is about to bless. Emma looked at Julian then. Only once. Long enough to know he had seen Marcus's hand on her wrist. Long enough to know he had not yet seen the poison. Your Majesty, she whispered, so softly the words barely lived, don't drink that. For one breath, Emma thought Julian Wolfe had heard her. Not the words. The danger inside them. His gray eyes lowered to her face, then to Marcus Reed's hand locked around her wrist, then to the glass waiting at the edge of the silver tray. Nothing in the Alpha King's expression changed. No alarm. No anger. No public fracture in the cold mask that held the entire hall under its weight. But his fingers did not close around the glass. That was enough to make Marcus's grip tighten. Pain shot up Emma's arm. She did not flinch. A maid who flinched gave people permission to call fear guilt. Marcus smiled, as if correcting a small mistake in service. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. The girl is nervous. Lady Celeste Morgan laughed softly. It was a beautiful sound. That made Emma hate it. Nervous. Celeste lifted her own glass. The black rose ring turned inward against her palm. How charming. I did not realize Ravenhall trained its maids to whisper during royal vows. A few nobles smiled. Not because it was funny. Because Celeste had shown them where cruelty could stand safely. Emma tried to pull her hand free. Marcus did not release her. Your Majesty, she said again, louder now. Not loud enough to be insolent. Loud enough to risk being heard. The glass. The glass was inspected, Marcus said. His voice remained warm. His fingers were iron. By me. That should have reassured the room. It did. That frightened Emma more than if they had shouted. A guard stepped forward from the wall. Remove her. Emma's heart struck hard against her ribs. Remove her, and Julian would drink. Remove her, and the silver dust would bite. Remove her, and the nightroot on the rim would look like wine, like ceremony, like peace, until the Alpha King's blood turned against him in front of every noble who had come to witness an alliance. Julian looked at the guard. Wait. One word. The hall obeyed. Celeste's smile thinned. Marcus's thumb pressed into the inside of Emma's wrist, exactly where a bruise would hide beneath her sleeve. Emma understood then that he was not only stopping her. He was warning her. Maids do not interrupt royal vows, Marcus said quietly, for her alone. Not if they want to leave this hall walking. Emma looked at him, at his calm face, at the trusted beta standing close enough to the king to turn murder into protocol. Then she looked at Celeste's ring. A tiny wet shine glimmered between two onyx petals. Not wine, not polish. Poison carried in a jewel. Emma's mouth went dry. She had no witness, no proof anyone would believe. Only a poisoned rim, silver dust hidden under red wine, and a blue flame candle that would turn black only after death had already been invited to the king's lips. Your Majesty, she whispered, please. This time, Julian's eyes sharpened. But Celeste moved first. She set her glass down with a soft click and stepped around the table, pale gown whispering over the floor like snow covering a grave. How touching, she said. A servant girl begging for attention on the night her king chooses his future queen. Emma's face burned. The hall watched. Nobles, guards, servants. Every person who had never had to prove that their fear was not ambition. I am not asking for attention, Emma said. Celeste tilted her head. Then what are you asking for? Emma looked at the crystal glass. The rim shone once beneath the blue flame. For him to live. The words killed the laughter. For half a second, truth stood naked in the room. Then Marcus shoved her wrist down. The tray tilted. A silver spoon slid from its edge and struck the floor with a bright, ringing sound. Every eye dropped to it. Every eye except Emma's. She saw Marcus's hand loosen. She saw Celeste's ring turn outward. She saw Julian's glass waiting within reach. And in that small stolen space between insult and punishment, Emma knew the hall would not let a maid stop the toast. So she stopped trying to warn them. She bent to pick up the spoon. Emma bent to pick up the spoon. That was what the hall saw. A maid lowering herself to the polished black floor after making a mistake. A servant correcting a servant's clumsiness. A small gray shape beneath the high table, beneath the noble's attention, beneath the place where power sat in carved chairs and lifted poisoned crystal to its mouth. That was what made it possible. People looked down when silver rang against stone. They looked at the fallen spoon. They looked at the embarrassment. They looked at everything except the glass. Emma's knees touched the cold floor. Her right hand closed around the spoon. Her left hand, still holding the edge of the tray, shifted 1 inch closer to Julian Wolfe's place setting. Not fast. Fast movements were noticed. Not slow. Slow movements were questioned. She moved the way maids moved when clearing crowded tables, with 100 tiny adjustments hidden inside obedience. A finger nudging a stem aside. A wrist turning the tray to keep balance. A breath timed with the rustle of Celeste Morgan's gown as the lady stepped back, certain the little spectacle was almost over. Emma lifted the spoon. At the same moment, she tilted the tray. The spare crystal glass slid toward her palm. Julian's glass slid away from his plate. Their stems touched once. A sound too soft for anyone to hear beneath the music starting again and the murmurs returning like flies to honey. Emma caught both. Switched both. Set one down. Kept one. The poison glass was now in her hand. Julian saw. She knew he saw because his eyes changed. Not widened. Not softened. Not yet understanding. But fixed, suddenly, on the place where her fingers held the stem of a glass that should have belonged to him. Marcus saw 1 second later. Too late. Emma rose. The spoon rested on the tray again. The spare glass stood before the Alpha King. The hall adjusted itself back into ceremony, relieved to find the world had not been broken by a maid's mistake. Celeste smiled. Shall we continue? Julian did not answer her immediately. His gaze remained on Emma. The weight of it should have crushed her. Instead, it steadied something inside her, because for the first time all night, the most powerful man in Ravenhall was truly looking at the right thing. Not the feast. Not the alliance. Not Celeste's painted smile. The glass in Emma's hand. Marcus stepped closer. Give that to me. Emma did not. His voice lowered. Now. She could feel the poison waiting against the rim, invisible and patient. If Marcus took the glass, it would vanish. If Celeste smiled again, the hall would forgive everything. If Emma spoke, they would drag her out before the blue flame ever turned black. No proof, no time, no permission, only her body. Julian's hand moved toward the glass before him, not to drink, but perhaps to stop the ceremony, to demand an answer, to do what kings did when truth finally reached them too late. Emma understood before he did. If he stopped now, Marcus would deny. Celeste would laugh. The poisoned rim would be wiped clean by a loyal hand. A maid's warning would become hysteria, ambition, madness. So Emma lifted the glass. The hall stilled again. Celeste's smile vanished. Marcus went pale. Julian took one step toward her. "Don't," he said. It was the first word he had spoken to her. Low, commanding, almost human beneath the crown. Emma looked at him over the rim of the crystal. For one terrible second, she wished she had been born someone he could believe without proof. Then she drank. The poison did not taste like death. That was the first cruel thing. It tasted sweet. Too sweet. Like dark cherries left in a closed room. Like sugared wine poured over flowers already beginning to rot. For half a second, Emma thought perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps fear had made an apothecary's daughter see ghosts in clean crystal. Perhaps the silver dust had been candle glare, the rim only polished glass, the bitterness only old wine and memory. Then the burn began, not in her mouth, in her blood. It struck beneath her tongue first, sharp and cold, then dropped through her throat like a blade made of ice. Emma's fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. The hall blurred at the edges, candles stretching into blue lines, faces losing their shapes, the black banners above the high table bending like shadows underwater. Someone gasped, not because she fell, not yet, because the blue flame candle beside Julian Wolfe's plate had turned black. The little flame twisted once, thin and dark, feeding on the poisoned breath rising from the crystal rim. Then it burned steady in a color no candle in Ravenhall was meant to hold. Black. Every noble saw it. Every guard saw it. Every servant saw it. Emma tried to set the glass down. Her hand would not obey. The crystal slipped from her fingers and struck the table on its side, spilling red wine across the white cloth. The wine spread toward the king's empty place, setting like blood remembering where it had been meant to go. Then pain opened inside her chest. Emma staggered. The tray fell first. Silver crashed against stone, louder than screams because no one had found their voice yet. The spoon rang once near her foot. A goblet rolled beneath the high table. Her knees weakened, but she caught the edge of the table with one hand, refusing the floor for one more breath. Her wrist had begun to change. Thin silver lines rose beneath the skin, branching from the inside of her palm toward her arm like frost under glass. Not blood, not veins. Something brighter, colder, wrong. The dust had found her pulse. The nightroot had found the path. A healer shouted from somewhere below the dais. Nightroot! The word broke the hall. Chairs scraped back. Nobles cried out. Guards moved toward the high table. Lady Celeste stepped away from the spreading wine, one hand pressed to her mouth in a performance of horror so perfect it nearly looked real. Marcus Reed reached for the fallen glass. Julian moved faster. His hand closed around Marcus's wrist before the beta touched the evidence. No one touches that glass. The command cut through everything. Emma heard it from very far away. Then her legs failed. She did not hit the floor. Julian caught her. The Alpha King caught her before her shoulders struck the stone, one arm around her back, the other bracing her head, as if she were something breakable and not the foolish maid who had just stolen death from his hand. His face filled her vision. Gray eyes, hard mouth, control cracking at the edges. Why? He asked. Emma tried to answer. Air scraped through her throat. No sound came. The silver lines crawled higher beneath her sleeve. Her lips had gone numb. The hall spun above her, blue candles and black flame, velvet and diamonds, fear and guilt watching from every direction. She forced her hand to move. Not toward Julian. Toward the glass. Toward the rim. Her fingers shook so badly she could barely point. Rim, she whispered. Julian's eyes sharpened. Emma swallowed blood-warm sweetness and pain. Not wine. The healer dropped to his knees beside them, reaching for her wrist. His face changed the moment he saw the silver veins. She has minutes, he said. The hall went silent again. Different this time. Not offended. Terrified, Julian looked from Emma's face to the black flame candle, then to Celeste's black rose ring, then to Marcus Reed, whose wrist was still locked in the king's hand. Emma saw understanding arrive. Not all of it. Enough. The Alpha King looked down at her, and the room that had mocked her, dismissed her, dragged her towards silence, finally understood what she had done. The poison had hit her first, because it had been meant for him. Julian Wolfe did not let the healer touch her first. That was what the hall remembered later. Not the black candle flame. Not the poison glass lying sideways on the white cloth. Not even Lady Celeste Morgan's perfect face going pale as every noble in Ravenhall realized death had been sitting at the king's place setting. They remembered the Alpha King lowering a poison Maid to the floor with his own hands and turning his body between her and the entire court. "No one leaves," he said. The doors closed before the echo finished. Iron bolts struck stone. Guards moved to every exit. Servants froze along the walls with trays still in their hands. Nobles who had spent their lives walking wherever they pleased suddenly stood trapped beneath the black banners, breathing the same air as their own suspicion. Emma heard it through pain. The bolts. The whispers. The sound of her own pulse turning wrong beneath her skin. The silver lines had reached her elbow now, thin and bright under pale flesh, beautiful in the way frost was beautiful when it killed crops before morning. Her throat burned. Every breath scraped. The sweetness of nightroot still coated her tongue like a lie refusing to leave. The healer pressed 2 fingers to her wrist and swore under his breath. Julian's eyes cut to him. "Save her. I need the antidote cabinet from the infirmary." "You have it." The healer looked up, startled. Julian did not repeat himself. A guard was already running. That was power, Emma thought dimly. Not shouting. Not panic. A command leaving the mouth and becoming movement before fear could argue with it. Marcus Reed found his voice first. "My king," he said, carefully, as if the title might shield him from the hand still locked around his wrist. "This may be an assassination attempt staged by the girl herself." The room shifted. Emma felt it. Even dying, she felt how quickly doubt looked for a poor place to land. Lady Celeste stepped forward, one hand at her throat, the black rose ring gleaming against her skin. She switched the glasses. Everyone saw it. She drank from the king's cup only after making a spectacle. Perhaps she meant to accuse someone before the alliance could be sealed. Emma tried to speak. Pain swallowed the sound. Julian looked at Celeste. Not angrily. Worse. Precisely. "She warned me before she drank." Celeste's eyes flickered. Only once. Marcus bowed his head. A clever assassin would. Julian's grip tightened around his wrist. The beta smile strained. Then a clever assassin, Julian said, would not point to the rim while dying. Silence. The healer leaned over Emma's face. "Stay with us." Emma wanted to laugh. Where else could she go? She was held between the poisoned floor and the Alpha King's arm, between the life she had spent being invisible and a death that had finally made everyone look. The guard returned with a black leather case. The healer opened it too fast, glass vials clinking together like frightened teeth. "Nightroot antidote needs a blood stabilizer. Silver dust accelerates the spread. If it entered through the mouth and rim contact, we may still have time." "May," Julian repeated. The healer went pale. "Yes, Your Majesty." Julian looked down at Emma. For the first time, the hall saw something human pass through the king's face. Not weakness. Not softness. A terrible refusal. "You took that glass from my hand," he said quietly. Emma's lips moved. No sound. He leaned closer. She forced the words through the burn. "Ring." His eyes sharpened. Emma's gaze dragged toward Celeste's hand. The black rose ring. The closed petals. The tiny wet shine hidden between them. Julian followed her stare. Celeste stepped back. Too late. "Hold her steady," the healer said. Julian did. With the same hands that had commanded armies, signed death warrants, and held Ravenhall beneath one crown. He held a maid's trembling shoulders while the antidote touched her tongue. It tasted bitter. Real. The pain did not vanish. But it stopped climbing. The silver lines beneath her skin trembled, brightened, then dulled by a fraction. The healer exhaled. Again. Julian did not look away from Emma as the second dose was given. Only when her breathing broke into something shallow but steady did he lift his head. His gaze found Marcus first, then Celeste, then the poison glass. "Now," the Alpha King said, voice low enough to chill every candle flame in the hall. We find out who placed death on my table. The ring did not look like a weapon. That was what made it dangerous. Lady Celeste Morgan's black rose ring had been admired all evening by women who understood jewelry better than poison, and by men who understood neither until both were used against them. It sat on her right hand like a promise carved from night, polished onyx petals folded inward around a center so dark it swallowed the blue candlelight. Emma had noticed it before the pain. Now, lying against Julian Wolfe's arm with antidote bitterness on her tongue and silver fading slowly beneath her skin, she watched the ring the way a dying person watched a door. Celeste saw her watching. Her hand curled. Julian saw that too. "Remove the ring," he said. Celeste's face went still. "Your Majesty?" "The ring." A smaller king might have shouted. Julian did not. That made the command worse. Celeste gave a delicate laugh, but no one in the hall followed it. "Surely you do not mean to strip your future queen in front of servants because a poisoned maid pointed at my hand." Emma tried to speak. The healer pressed a steadying hand near her shoulder. "Do not." But Emma had already spent silence badly tonight. "Petals," she whispered. Julian looked down at her. Emma forced the words through a throat that felt lined with glass. "Inside the petals." Celeste stepped back. Marcus Reed moved at the same time. Only half a step, toward the fallen glass. Julian did not even turn his head. "Hold him." Two guards seized Marcus before his boot crossed the edge of the spilled wine. His composure cracked then, not fully, but enough. A flash of fury under loyal eyes. A man exposed too soon. Celeste lifted her chin. "This is absurd." Julian reached for her hand. She resisted. That was the confession before the evidence. The hall saw it. The nobles saw it. The servants saw it. Every guard who had almost dragged Emma away saw Lady Celeste Morgan, future queen of Ravenhall, pull her ringed hand from the Alpha King as if the jewel burned. Julian caught her wrist. Carefully, coldly, he removed the ring himself. The black rose looked smaller in his palm. He held it toward the blue flame candle. For one moment, nothing happened. Then a thin bead of clear liquid gathered between the onyx petals. The flame turned black. A gasp tore through the hall. The healer took the ring with a strip of linen, pressing one petal aside with the tip of a silver probe. A hidden seam opened. Tiny grains of silver dust clung inside the carved flower, mixed with a dark residue that smelled sweet, bitter, and rotten all at once. "Nightroot," the healer said. The word no longer sounded like diagnosis. It sounded like judgment. Celeste's beauty changed when fear reached it. Not vanished. Changed. It became sharper, meaner, stripped of the softness she had worn for the Alliance feast. "You cannot believe her over me," she said. Julian looked at Emma, at the silver lines still dim beneath her skin, at the maid who had begged him not to drink, switched his glass when no one would listen, and let poison prove what rank had refused to hear. "I believe what she bled to show me." Marcus laughed once. "A mistake." Julian turned to him. The guards forced the beta's gloved hands onto the table. One glove was clean. The other bore a wine-dark stain along the thumb and first finger, nearly hidden in the seam. Emma saw it and closed her eyes. Not in relief. In exhaustion. She had been right again. Julian stepped closer. "Remove it." Marcus said nothing. The glove came off. Beneath it, his fingertips were stained faintly purple-black, the color of crushed nightroot before it dried clear on crystal. The hall went silent in the way a room goes silent when betrayal stops being rumor and becomes skin. Julian looked from Marcus to Celeste. "My beta inspected every cup," he said. "My fiancé carried the poison." Celeste's mouth trembled with rage. "You needed an alliance." "No," Julian said. "I needed truth." His gaze returned to Emma. The room followed it this time. No one laughed. No one called her nervous. No one said "maid" as if the word meant less than witness. Emma tried to breathe without pain and almost succeeded. The antidote had slowed the poison, but her body felt far away, cold at the edges and heavy in the center. Still, when Julian lowered himself beside her again, she saw the truth in his face. The Alpha King was not speechless anymore. He was dangerous, and for the first time that night, his danger was not turned toward her. The Alliance feast became a prison before anyone understood it had become a trial. The doors stayed locked. The black flame still burned beside the king's empty place setting, small and terrible, casting a shadow over the spilled wine where death had spread across the white cloth and failed to reach the man it had been poured for. Guards stood at every exit. Nobles remained frozen in clusters, jewels flashing at throats and wrists, their fine clothes suddenly useless against the knowledge that treason had sat at the high table with them. Emma heard all of it from the floor. Not clearly. Pain had made the room uneven. Voices arrived in pieces. Footsteps. Metal. The healer's low commands. Julian Wolfe's silence, heavier than anyone else's shouting could have been. The antidote kept her alive, but it did not make living gentle. Her throat still burned. Her blood still felt too cold beneath her skin. Every breath had to be chosen. Julian had not let go of her. That was the part the hall could not stop watching. The Alpha King sat on the floor beside a maid in a stained gray dress, one arm braced behind her shoulders while the healer checked the fading silver lines at her wrist. He did not place her aside after she had served her purpose. He did not hand her to servants. He did not stand at the dais where kings belonged. He stayed where the poison had dropped her. Lady Celeste Morgan stood under guard near the table, her black rose ring wrapped in linen beside the poisoned glass. Without the ring, her hand looked strangely bare, almost ordinary. Marcus Reed stood several steps away, both gloves removed, his stained fingers exposed beneath the blue and black candlelight. The alliance was necessary, Celeste said. No one had asked her. That was why the words sounded afraid. Julian looked up slowly. For whom? Her mouth tightened. For Ravenhall. For stability. For the border pacts. You know what they will do if this union fails. They will do nothing tonight, Julian said. Marcus gave a short, bitter breath. You think this ends with us? The hall sharpened around the question. Emma's eyes opened. Julian felt the small movement and looked down. Do not speak. She almost obeyed. Almost. Then she saw Marcus's face. Not defeated. Calculating. Her lips parted. Blue candle. The healer leaned closer. Miss Whitaker. Emma forced herself to continue. It should have turned black before the toast. Julian's eyes shifted toward the candle. Then to Marcus. A silence opened. The kind with teeth. Emma swallowed, tasting bitterness and blood-warm sweetness. Unless someone changed it. The head steward, pale as wax, stepped forward. Your Majesty, Beta Reed inspected the candles before the feast. He dismissed the apothecary flamekeeper and said he would handle the ritual placements himself. Marcus's face went still. There it was. Not the poison. The cover. Julian rose carefully, easing Emma into the healer's support without taking his eyes off his Beta. Searched the candle base. A guard crossed to the high table, lifted the blackened candle from its silver holder, and unscrewed the base. Something fell out. A small blue glass vial. Empty. The healer picked it up with linen, smelled the rim, and went pale. Flame duller. It suppresses detection until heated by active poison. The hall understood slowly. Then all at once. The candle had been meant to lie too. Marcus had not only failed to find the poison. He had protected it. Celeste turned on him. You said the candle would not react. Marcus's eyes cut to her. Too late. Their conspiracy spoke through the mistake. Julian's voice dropped. Chain them. Celeste tried to step back. Julian, Alpha King, he said. The correction struck harder than anger. Guards seized her. Marcus fought once, violently enough for steel to flash, but he was outnumbered before the first noble finished gasping. Iron closed around his wrists. Celeste's silver gown twisted beneath the guard's grip, no longer bridal, no longer graceful, only fabric caught around a woman who had mistaken beauty for immunity. Emma watched through half-closed eyes. The poison had not killed her, but it had stripped the room clean. Julian turned back to the court. The alliance is dissolved. The vows are void. Every document signed by Marcus Reed in the last month will be sealed and reviewed before dawn. Then he looked at the servants along the wall. At Mrs. Vale. At every person who had watched Emma beg and almost let rank bury truth. This maid warned me, he said. You laughed. No one moved. Julian returned to Emma and lowered himself beside her again, his black sleeve brushing the spilled wine as if he did not care what the poison touched now that it had failed to take him. You switched the glass, he said quietly. Emma looked at him. His face was controlled again, but not cold. Not to her. She took death from my hand, he said, loud enough for the hall to hear. And from this moment, Emma Whitaker is under my protection. The room bowed its head. Not to a queen. Not to an alliance. to a maid who had fallen before a poisoned throne and lived long enough to prove why. The servant infirmary had never received a king before. Emma knew that because the room seemed ashamed of itself. The ceiling was too low. The plaster had cracked above the medicine shelves where winter damp entered the walls. 3 narrow cots stood in a row, their blankets clean but thin from too many washings. The air smelled of boiled linen, old herbs, vinegar, and the tired kind of mercy reserved for people who were expected to return to work before they were whole. This was where servants came when they were hurt quietly. Burned hands, split knuckles, fever hidden until standing became impossible. A place for injuries that did not matter enough to disturb the royal healer unless blood reached the floor. Now Alpha King Julian Wolfe stood beside the center cot, with poison on his sleeve and a maid's life in his hands. No one knew where to look. The healer bent over Emma, fingers pressed to her wrist where the silver lines had faded but not vanished. They still shone beneath her pale skin in thin, broken threads, duller now, but present, like frost refusing to melt in shadow. "She is stable," he said. Julian did not move. "That is not alive enough." The healer swallowed. The antidote slowed the nightroot, but the silver dust carried it faster than ordinary exposure. "There may be residue in the blood." Emma heard him from far away. Stable. Residue. Exposure. Words men used when they wanted suffering to sound clean. Her throat burned too badly to laugh. Julian looked down at her. "What do you need?" The question reached her more clearly than the healer's hands. "What do you need? Not what did you do? Not why did you touch my glass? Not who taught a maid to recognize poison?" Emma tried to answer, but her mouth felt full of ash. The healer lifted a cup of water to her lips. She managed one swallow before pain closed her throat again. "Blue bottle," she whispered. Julian leaned closer. Emma forced her eyes open. The room tilted around his face. Dark hair, gray eyes, jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. He looked less like a king here beneath the low ceiling, and more like a man standing too close to a debt he could not command away. "In the old cabinet," she breathed. "Bottom shelf. My mother's mark." Mrs. Vale, who had followed them to the infirmary with guilt stiffening her spine, looked sharply toward the shelves. "Those are discarded village remedies. They were never approved for royal use." Julian turned his head. The room went cold. "She is not royal use," he said. "She is the reason I am breathing." Mrs. Vale lowered her eyes. A servant boy ran to the cabinet. His hands shook as he opened the lower doors and searched through cracked jars, folded cloth, brown bottles, and faded labels. Then he stopped. "This one." He held up a small blue bottle sealed with wax. On the front, drawn in black ink, was a tiny sprig of rosemary crossed with a crescent moon. Emma's vision blurred. Her mother's mark. For years, that bottle had sat below the attention of healers who would never trust medicine made by poor hands. For years, Emma had walked past it carrying basins and bandages, telling herself memory was not the same as hope. Julian took the bottle himself. The healer hesitated. "Your Majesty," without knowing the contents, Emma whispered. "Milk thistle, white ash, bitterroot, 4 silver-carried toxins." The healer stared at her, then at the bottle. Then, slowly, he nodded. "That could bind what remains." Julian broke the wax. The scent rose at once. Bitter, green, familiar enough to hurt. Emma closed her eyes as the healer mixed 3 drops into water and lifted it to her mouth. The taste was awful, sharp enough to pull tears from her eyes, alive enough that her body recognized it before her mind did. The burning in her throat eased by a fraction. Then another. Her fingers twitched against the blanket. Julian saw. Of course he saw. The entire hall had missed poison in a crystal glass, but the Alpha King saw one maid's hand move beneath a thin infirmary sheet. His shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. The healer exhaled. "It is working." No one spoke for several breaths. Emma turned her head slightly toward the blue bottle in Julian's hand. She was not licensed. Julian looked at the mark on the label. "No," he said quietly. She was right. The words settled over Emma more gently than sleep. Outside the infirmary, Ravenhall Keep whispered, searched, accused, and rearranged itself around betrayal. Inside, the maid who had drunk poison meant for a king breathed through the medicine of a forgotten woman, while Julian Wolfe stood guard beside her cot, as if the low servant infirmary had become the most important room in his kingdom. Emma woke to the sound of rain against glass. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Not the great hall. There was no music here. No nobles murmuring beneath black banners. No blue candles burning at the edge of silver plates. No beautiful woman smiling over a poisoned ring. No crystal glass waiting like a lie at the king's hand. Only rain. Only the smell of bitter herbs. Only the thin weight of a blanket over her body and the ache in her throat reminding her that she had swallowed death and been rude enough not to keep it down. She opened her eyes. The servant infirmary came into focus slowly. Cracked ceiling. Low shelves. Brown bottles. Folded linen. A single candle burning on the table beside her cot. Near it stood the small blue bottle with her mother's mark turned toward her as if the dead had found a way to sit vigil. Then she saw Julian Wolfe. He was not sleeping. Kings probably did not sleep in chairs beside servant cots, Emma thought. At least not in stories. In stories, kings returned to war councils, punishment chambers, high rooms with carved beds, and guards outside the door. Julian sat in the narrow wooden chair beside her, black coat removed, shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms, one hand resting on the arm of the chair and the other holding a folded report he was not reading. His eyes moved to hers the instant her breathing changed. "You are awake." Emma tried to answer. Pain closed around her throat. Julian reached for the cup of water before she could lift a hand. He did not call for a servant. He did not wait for the healer. He held the cup himself, steady and careful, letting her take one small swallow, then another. The water tasted like metal and bitterroot. Alive tasted terrible. She was grateful anyway. "How long?" she whispered. 6 hours. Her eyes shifted toward the window. Still dark. Still raining. The hall. Locked until sunrise. Celeste. In chains. Marcus. Julian's mouth hardened. Alive. For now. That should not have comforted her. It did. Dead men could not answer questions, and Emma had nearly died for answers. She turned her wrist beneath the blanket. The silver lines were still there, faint and broken under her pale skin, no longer crawling, but not gone. A memory of poison written where everyone could see it. Julian followed her gaze. His voice lowered. "Does it hurt?" "Yes." The truth escaped before obedience could dress it. Emma went still, almost apologizing. Julian's eyes sharpened, not with anger, but with something that made apology feel unnecessary. "Good," he said quietly. "Tell the truth here." Here. Such a small word. Such a dangerous mercy. Emma looked away first. Maids do not usually survive telling the truth. "No," Julian said. "That is one of many things Ravenhall will answer for." The candle flame moved between them. Not blue. Ordinary gold. Emma stared at it until her vision steadied. "The poison was made to shame your guards." Julian did not speak. So she continued, because if she stopped now, fear would return and put its hand over her mouth again. The wine would test clean. The bottle would test clean. Even the candle would stay blue until the rim touched breath. Everyone would say your security passed. Then you would die during the vow, and the court would blame weakness, sickness, maybe an old enemy. Julian's face remained still, but the room seemed to grow colder around him. "And Celeste would mourn beautifully," he said. Emma closed her eyes. "Yes." Rain struck the window harder. Julian set the unread report on the table. "My investigators found 3 servants dismissed from the preparation room before the feast. All by Marcus's order. 1 flamekeeper, 1 wine steward, 1 glass polisher." Emma opened her eyes. "Who polished the king's glass?" "No one admits to it." "Then it was not polished," she whispered. "It was treated." Julian leaned forward slightly. "With what?" Emma looked at her mother's blue bottle, then at the brown stains on her own fingertips where antidote had dried. "Lye wash first," she said, "to strip every trace. Then clear binding oil on the rim. Nightroot dissolved into it. Silver dust at the base to make the reaction faster once wolf blood took the poison in." The words sounded too certain for a maid. Julian noticed. "Of course he did. Your mother taught you more than remedies." Emma's throat tightened. "My mother taught people who could not afford royal healers how to live one more night." Silence settled. This time, it did not feel like punishment. Julian looked at the blue bottle again. "Then Ravenhall owes its king's life to a woman it never licensed and a daughter it tried not to hear." Emma did not know what to do with that sentence. So she did what she had done all her life. She lowered her eyes. Julian's voice came softer. "Emma." Her name in his mouth made her still. Do not disappear from me after saving my life. The rain filled the room around them. Emma lifted her eyes slowly. The Alpha King held her gaze, not as if she were a servant who had touched his glass, not as if she were evidence in his trial, but as if the breath still moving through his body had become something he would spend the rest of the night honoring. And for the first time since the poison touched her tongue, Emma believed she might live long enough to be seen. By sunrise, Ravenhall Keep smelled of rain, extinguished candles, and fear. Emma noticed it from the infirmary doorway. She should not have been standing. The healer had said that 3 times. Mrs. Vale had said it twice, though her voice no longer carried the hard edge it had worn in the preparation room. Even Julian Wolfe had looked at the blanket around Emma's shoulders and the faint silver lines still broken beneath her wrist and said nothing for one long breath, which somehow felt more dangerous than in order. But Emma had asked to see the preparation room. No, not asked. She had whispered, "The proof is not in the hall." Julian had understood before anyone else did. Now 2 guards walked ahead of them through the lower corridor, and 2 more followed behind. Not to hold Emma prisoner. To make sure no one else could reach her. That difference should have comforted her. Instead, it made every servant they passed lower their eyes as if looking at her might remind them they had almost watched her die. The preparation room had been sealed after the feast. The air inside was stale with cold wine, dead smoke, and the sour ghost of panic. Trays remained where they had been abandoned. Linen cloths lay folded beside crystal bottles. A row of unused glasses stood along the stone table, ordinary and harmless in the gray morning light. Emma looked at them and felt her throat burn again. Not from poison. Memory. Julian stood beside her, close but not touching. "Tell me what you need." She moved slowly toward the washing basin near the back wall. The glass was too clean because it was stripped. Whoever prepared it had to wash away every normal trace first. The royal investigator, a narrow-faced man named Ellis, frowned. "We searched the cabinets." "Not the cabinets." Emma pointed to the drain. Ellis looked doubtful. Julian did not. "Open it," the Alpha King said. The guard knelt, removed the iron grate, and reached inside with a strip of cloth wrapped around his hand. He pulled out a wad of linen, soaked dark at one edge, hidden deep in the pipe, where rushing water should have carried it away. Emma stepped forward. Julian's hand lifted slightly, as if to stop her, then lowered. She took the cloth with 2 fingers. It smelled sharp, bitter under soap, lye wash, clear binding oil, and beneath both, the faint dead sweetness of nightroot. "There," she whispered. Ellis went pale. The healer took the cloth and held it near a fresh blue flame candle. The flame shivered, then blackened at the tip. No one spoke. Then Mrs. Vale made a small sound behind them. Emma turned. The older woman was staring at the cloth, not with confusion, but recognition. Julian saw it. "You know this linen." Mrs. Vale's hands twisted together. It came from the royal polishing set. Only 3 people had access before the feast. "Name them." "The glass polisher." Her voice shook. "Beta Reed." "And Lady Celeste," when she requested a private inspection of the vow table. Emma closed her eyes. There it was. Not suspicion. Chain. The glass. The ring. The glove. The candle. The hidden cloth. A murder built from beautiful things and servant silence. Julian turned to Ellis. "Bring Marcus Reed and Celeste Morgan to the council chamber. Bring the cloth, the ring, the candle base, the glass." Ellis bowed and left quickly. Emma's knees weakened after he was gone. This time, Julian did touch her. Only one hand beneath her elbow, steadying without making a prison of his grip. "You have done enough," he said. Emma almost laughed. Enough was a word powerful people used when they wanted the poor to stop before the truth became inconvenient. She looked up at him. "No, Your Majesty. I drank enough. I have not spoken enough." Something moved through his face. Respect, maybe. Regret, certainly. Then he nodded. In the council chamber, Celeste sat with her hands bound in white silk because no one had found the courage to put iron on a woman they had expected to crown. Marcus wore chains. His stained fingers were bare against the table. When Emma entered, both looked at her. Celeste with hatred, Marcus with calculation. Julian placed the poisoned linen between them. "The maid you called desperate found what you hid," he said. Marcus smiled faintly. "A maid who understands poison too well." The accusation tried to rise. It found no room. Julian's voice cut it down. "Careful. Every breath she takes is evidence that the poison was meant for me. Emma stood beside the table, pale, shaking, wrapped in a servant infirmary blanket before the people who had dressed death as ceremony. And for the first time, she was not asked to leave. She was asked to speak. Emma had spent her life being told where not to stand. Not beside the high table. Not near closed doors. Not within earshot of royal conversations. Not in rooms where decisions were made by people who could ruin a poor woman with a glance and then forget the shape of her face by supper. Now she stood in the council chamber of Ravenhall Keep with poison still written faintly beneath her skin, a servant blanket around her shoulders, and Alpha King Julian Wolfe waiting for her to speak. That was the strangest part. He waited. The ring lay on the table. The poisoned glass beside it. The blackened candle base. The hidden linen pulled from the drain, still sharp with lye wash, binding oil, and nightroot. Every object had been small enough to hide. Together, they looked like a murder too proud to stay invisible. Emma placed one hand on the table to steady herself. The wine was clean. Celeste Morgan laughed softly. At last, the maid admits it. Julian did not look at Celeste. Emma did. No, she said. That is why you chose the glass. Celeste's smile thinned. Emma pointed to the poisoned crystal. Nightroot was dissolved into clear binding oil and wiped along the rim. Silver dust was placed in the base, not to poison the wine, but to quicken the reaction once wolf blood took the nightroot in. The candle should have revealed it, but Beta Reed changed the flame base with a dulling agent. Marcus Reed leaned back as far as his chains allowed. Interesting knowledge for a servant. Emma's throat burned. She tasted bitterness again. Fear, or memory. This time, she did not lower her eyes. My mother taught the poor because royal healers ignored them, she said. Your mistake was believing knowledge only wears a title. Silence settled. Julian's gaze moved to Marcus. Who supplied the nightroot? Marcus said nothing. Celeste did. Not with words. Her eyes flicked toward the black rose ring. Only once. Enough. Julian picked up the ring and pressed the hidden petal seam open with the tip of a dagger. A second compartment clicked loose beneath the first, smaller than a fingernail. Inside was a folded scrap of blackened paper, protected from the oil by a wax lining. Ellis, the investigator, unfolded it carefully. His face changed. Julian took the paper. For the first time since the poisoning, his control turned visibly cold. Payment instructions, he said. To Marcus Reed. From Lady Celeste Morgan's private seal. Celeste went pale. Marcus lunged against his chains. You promised no record. The words left his mouth before wisdom could catch them. The council chamber went still. There were confessions made by courage. This was not one of them. This was a lie tripping over its own arrogance. Julian looked at both of them. Take them to the eastern cells. Separate rooms. Separate guards. No messages. No visitors. No mercy disguised as rank. Guards moved. Celeste rose with the last of her pride clutched around her like a torn gown. You would destroy an alliance because a maid drank from the wrong glass. Julian stepped toward her. The room seemed to shrink. No, he said. I destroy it because she drank from the right one. Celeste had no answer for that. When they dragged her out, her silver dress whispered over the stone floor like a vow being buried. Marcus followed in chains, his stained fingers curled, his face no longer calm enough to be useful. Only after the door closed did Emma realize she was shaking. Julian saw. He crossed the room and stopped before her. Not too close, not touching without permission. You should be resting. Emma almost smiled. It hurt too much, so she did not. I was told I had not spoken enough. You spoke enough to save my life twice. She looked down at her wrist. The silver lines had faded to pale threads, but they were still there. Proof beneath skin. A reminder that her body had become the evidence no one could silence. Julian turned toward the chamber doors. Open the hall. Emma looked up. Your Majesty? The court needs to hear what it tried not to hear. The great hall was full within minutes. Nobles, guards, servants, flamekeepers, glass polishers, kitchen maids. Every witness to the feast. Every person who had watched a maid beg a king not to drink and decided rank mattered more than fear. Julian stood before them with Emma at his side. Not behind him. Beside him. The alliance is ended, he said. Celeste Morgan and Marcus Reed are charged with treason, attempted regicide, and conspiracy under royal seal. A ripple moved through the hall. He lifted one hand, and it died. Emma Whitaker warned me. She was ignored. She was mocked. She was threatened. When no one would let her stop the toast, she took the poisoned glass herself. No one looked at her apron now. No one looked at her gray dress as if it explained her worth. Julian's voice lowered. The maid you dismissed took death from my hand. Emma's eyes burned. The hall bowed. Servants first, then guards, then nobles, slower, ashamed, but bowing all the same. Julian looked at her, and this time the whole kingdom watched him see her. From this moment, Emma Whitaker is under my protection. Her mother's remedies will be restored to the royal infirmary. Her knowledge will be recorded, honored, and paid for. And anyone who calls her only a maid again will answer to me. Emma could not speak. For once, silence did not feel like something forced into her mouth. It felt like breath returning. The blue candles had been replaced by ordinary gold flames. The poisoned glass was gone. The high table stood stripped of roses, vows, and lies. Emma Whitaker had entered the night carrying a tray. She left it with the Alpha King alive beside her. The court bowed before her, and the truth finally wearing her name instead of swallowing it.